Hey, it's Brett, and this is Brett and Some Books. This is the Progressive Plantation. I think it's the fifth installment. We are starting from the section Occupy Wall Street, Internal Racism Run Amok. In order to explain the problems of Occupy Wall Street, it is necessary to recite my contacts with the movement. First, I have been advocating for months on my Facebook page that a movement against government austerity policies and corporate exploitation by the capitalist would come into existence, and we would see the kind of resistance displayed in Spain, Greece, and the UK, among other countries that fought tooth and nail. So when I first heard of the OWS movement taking taking action in New York, I was thrilled. I thought that I would see a mass of black and POC workers and others united in a mass movement against the rich and their unemployment and austerity policies. Since black workers had the highest levels of poverty in the country at 26% and the highest level of unemployment at 16.9%, I thought for sure that their plight would finally be put forward. But that is not what happened. It seems that white upper and middle class elements, including small businessmen ruined by Wall Street, pacifists, and other white elements, had set up the movement to support their worldview. They were extremely hostile, even racist, to peoples of color who joined this movement. Still, that did not deter me or lead me to reject the entire movement as a fraud. So when OWS Solidarity Group, Occupy Memphis, was created in Memphis, Tennessee, myself and my wife, Jonina, rushed over to Overton Park in Midtown to attend the meeting. The first thing we noticed was that this park was in an upper middle class community, mostly white, and when we got to the canopy where the meeting was being held and strode in, ready to join the fight, we were literally shocked into silence. This meeting was an all-white affair of 100 white activists, ourselves, and one other black guy, who seemed to be an employee of the Mid-South Peace and Social Justice Center, and was taking pictures of the meeting. We're the only people of color at this event. We felt like we had been kicked in the stomach, felt sickened and angered. Here, Memphis, Tennessee, as a major black city, 65%, and the people who organized this event could not even invite one social group or activist in the black or Hispanic communities. In fact, they did not invite us, even though I was on the mailing list of the Mid-South Peace and Justice Center, who, despite what they claimed, were ones who organized the entire event. It was an activist friend whom we knew who passed on her invitation email to us. Why was this important? Because this group claims to be 99% of the population, but my question was 99% of what population, and exactly whom did they represent? White radicals cannot posture and claim that their agenda is for everyone, when almost all of the participants are middle-class white people in a majority black city. Another thing is that we do not have the same agenda. These white people are concerned with something totally different than with the massive poverty in our community in a city that the U.S. Census Bureau had just designated the poorest city in the nation. Yet, who was speaking for these black, poor, and unemployed? Nobody at this event. They did not represent anybody but themselves and a white agenda. This shows the corruption and arrogance of pacifists and white left activists. We've left this meeting feeling dirty and extremely angry, even snapping at each other in our frustration, but we decided to do something about it. We came home and denounced these white activists and Occupy Memphis on their Facebook page and challenged anti-white activists to step up and do something, to understand and come back to the group, do something about the racist exclusion and obvious internal racism in the group. Predictably, some begged us to understand and to come back to the group, and it seems the majority angrily defended the group and its politics. Only one guy posted a statement of solidarity and also denounced racism. I also posted my impressions and denunciations of the group on my own Facebook page, and almost immediately, people of color and anti-racist activists returned telling me that in their cities, the same problem was happening. In fact, I heard from activists in 10 cities in a matter of hours telling me they experienced the same thing. I began to understand that this was a national problem throughout the Occupy movement, leading to the inescapable conclusion that they did not care if activists of color took part, they were pushing a white agenda. Then I started seeing letters and articles from activists of color telling me that they not only experienced exclusion, but overt acts of racism and attempts at racist intimidation by activists and erstwhile leaders of various Occupy City Solidarity chapters. When they tried to raise these matters within the local groups, they were met with indifference, hostility, and threats. This kind of blatant racism is intolerable, but it shows the nature and degree of internal racism in the Occupy Wall Street and its solidarity groups. Yet, many of the white activists and quite a few of the black POC activists defended the issues as isolated incidents, manufactured provocations, or issues that were being looked into, and other evasions. There were also those OWS solidarity groups who stated that they had created a POC outreach committee, which raises the question why they weren't brought in when the movement was at the planning stages, if they intended for them to take full part. The worst attitude is that it was no big deal and that we can't focus on racial issues because our movement is too important. This means, of course, that they take the attitude that this is a side issue, or one of little consequence. The racist idea that this is our movement and that racial issues will just mess it all up is the mistaken belief among many white radicals that only they can build a movement for the salvation of the whole society with a white agenda for the overall struggle. They refuse to see the diversity of concerns of women of color, black workers, Asian or indigenous peoples who have totally different history of oppression and exploitation under capitalism. They also refuse to see the fact that they start from a very privileged and isolated place in society, and that they do not suffer from the type of extreme oppression over many centuries due to white colonial domination, genocide, and racial oppression. They have no framework of understanding, and the arrogance and hostility of saying, "I don't care, let them start their own movement if they don't like it," is sheer brazen racism. This coming from those claiming to represent 99% of the commoner population, which is the height of hypocrisy. Such racism will ultimately be the defeat or death of this movement, just as it has for other previous coalitions ostensibly created on a white radical class basis, besides proving that it does not unite with the struggles of peoples of color. It also betrays that they have no understanding of the internal workings of racism inside such a white-led social change movement. The tyranny of a movement without structure claiming that there is no leadership is a common scam known to anarchism, where hidden shot callers perpetrate the farce of equality, internal democracy, consensus process. It is worse when it is corrupt and fraudulent white leadership designed to frustrate the desires of white people of color to raise their issues and have representation in the movement. It is crucial that peoples of color organize their own internal caucuses for equal representation and to pressure this white leadership to afford them the same rights as any other member and end these internal racist abuses. Only a powerful movement of POC inside Occupy Wall Street demanding accountability can get their issues heard and redirect the entire movement to deal with the massive poverty and unemployment in this period. But anti-racist or anti-colonial whites must create an anti-racist, anti-colonial caucus working with POC that deals with acting as an internal pressure group, with making sure that questions of racism and internal oppression are front and center in this movement and not put off to another day. Further, the white radical politics can no longer dominate a movement claiming to represent the whole of society and seeking their liberation, the so-called 99%. It is not known if this movement can ever live up to its own creed, or is just another fraudulent white radical tendency to keep white leftists and pacifists in control of all social movements in America. One thing is for sure, the POC and anti-racists should stay on top of them to make sure that they make the changes they think are needed and not surrender to racism in the name of any false class unity. Finally, if we cannot trust OWS and these solidarity groups in the movement to even include all those locked out and oppressed by this capitalist system in favor of a white rights middle class agenda, how could we ever trust that after a social revolution we would not have yet another racist society? We would have given blood, sweat, and tears to this struggle, but been betrayed once again, and still have to battle for our full human rights and liberation. The total uselessness of anti-racist consciousness-raising programs. Sometime during the 1800s, the building of anti-racist tendencies gave way to white-led anti-racist training programs for consciousness-raising. The programs varied, of course, but most of them purported to train white radical activists in anti-racist theory, the history of the struggles of peoples of color in America, and other subjects to sensitize them as to the plight of the oppressed POC and make them a better anti-racist ally. This type of consciousness raising is a total fraud. It does absolutely nothing to transform the personalities or the practices of white radicals. It's just a way of getting such training on a resume to help them get a job with a social justice agency that has POC staff, or just make them feel good about themselves, instead of being burdened with the angst of the racial history of white people in America. The main reason is it is incomplete, if not a total fraud. It is because none of this training of activists, staff, or board of directors deals with transforming the white-led nonprofit activist group, organizing center, or social justice movement and its structure itself. Lecturing white people in a nice way will not rid an entity of internal racism, regardless of what new knowledge they possess about the workings of racism will not ensure they will change themselves or their institution, and an anti-racism struggle inside of white social change institutions must deal with the transforming of the institution as much as the people. As long as the material conditions yet exist, and the same board of directors and entrenched white racists are still calling the shots, there is no question this will continue as a racist group. It requires an internal anti-racist struggle on the inside of the most serious sort to transform such institutions, so serious that it deals with the very soul and survival of the movement itself. The issue is that if it cannot be saved, then it must be smashed, as it does more harm than good to leave it go. Also, the trainers of such programs are highly suspect. One such anti-racist trainer, Chris Crass, based in San Francisco, California, even after he heard of the many racist incidents inside of Occupy Wall Street, continued to spout a line that this was the most important group in 20 years, and we should not impede it with questions of racial politics. No white-led social movement is more important than racial oppression by its very ranks, as this has killed many a previous movement that pleaded class unity as a cloak to hide its racism, and ultimately this opportunism fractured the movement. This one will be no different. These anti-racist white trainers, whom I refer to as the blind leading the blind, just don't get it. They serve no useful function at all and perpetrate a fraud upon the movement. They dishonestly sell out to internal racism and provide no relief to the POC who are suffering from the hands of racists inside such movements. They reinforce racism rather than dispel it, and merely proves the absolute treachery and bankruptcy of white-led racist training. They ain't building no new nation. They're trying to put POC on the new progressive plantation, while they absolve white people of their crimes against the oppressed peoples of color. You cannot put internal racism off to another day, because we create visions of the new society and the type of organizations and movements we build now. So, I denounce all of these so-called white-led and created anti-racist training programs as a fraud that does not decolonize white radical social movements, but acts as accomplice to their treachery. What should I do about racism inside my organization? Perhaps you belong to one of these types of white progressive social groups or white radicals that I have described. What can you do to dismantle racism within? First is to ask how the group is governed. Who created it? Where does the money come from? How many peoples of color belong to the group? Do they have a voice in operations and full rights of participation? Who really makes the decisions in the group? These are just a few preliminary questions to understand if you have internal racism in the group. One question will usually lead to another until you arrive at the decisive question as to whether this group has a problem with internal racism. Next is to examine how the group was created. Was it just founded by white people? What do POC and the community think of the group? Have there been a number of racist incidents in the group's history? If so, how were they handled? Does the group have any written anti-racist policy for employees or group members? Have they ever been used? And how was the POC employee or member treated? Again, just some of these can lead to others. Does the group claim to be anti-racist? How and why do they make the claim? Do they empower the white people over the POC? Do the POC members have their own caucus? And how do whites feel about this? What anti-racist training has the board and all of its members ever had? What was the result? Did anything change? How did POC members feel about it? Do they think racism still exists inside the group? Was an independent internal anti-racist movement created to deal with racism? What has it ever done, and how did it organize? These are important questions, but they only let you get some understanding of the depth of the problem, not solve it or fight internal racism. Here are 10 tips to transform your white social justice movement or center. First, number 1, never tolerate racism in any form. This includes racist jokes among the whites, harassing POC, covering up racist incidents, no matter how minuscule. We cannot allow racist culture to take over an organization. It makes hypocrites of all white activists in social justice and left radical tendencies. Such people have to be challenged and expelled from the movement. 2, make sure all POC inside your organizations have a full voice and internal organization of their own, and assure them that the anti-racist whites have got their back. 3, make sure there is an independent anti-racist movement inside the organization which can put maximum pressure on the leaders of the organization to make major changes or else close down shop. Never back away or withdraw from a racist group. You have the absolute duty to stay and fight within a racist structure to transform it or smash it in the internal fight over racism. You must organize others to work with you, both whites and POC, and build a powerful caucus which can check the leaders and their racist members of the board. 5, force the group to deal with anti-racism, anti-colonialism as the core concern of the group, no matter what else is on the agenda. 6, make the group unite with the political agenda of POC and their liberation movements, and force the group to provide these POC organizations with material and political support, without any preconditions. Make the white social justice group raise issues that affect communities of color and not just a white rights agenda. 8. Make sure that when a broad-based social change movement or project is being created, that the group contacts and attempts to bring in POC groups at the planning stages so it can be known if racism is a problem from the very beginning and give them a voice. Use your white privilege to build an anti-racist liberation support movement accountable to POC communities and organizations. 10. Do not hire or allow the group to hire black and other POCs just for window dressing and social change movement, but give them the power and room to do their jobs without interference from jealous or racist members of the group. Make sure that they have all the support and backing of the group and do not have to demean or prostitute themselves to keep the job. Do not allow them to be fired without any support or struggle. These are not infallible suggestions for either nonprofit progressive groups or white radical organizations, and they are certainly not the answer for every situation you will encounter. They may not even be able to reform or transform your group into an actual anti-racist organization, and if not, you must work to smash it, rather than let it stay alive and continue to commit crimes against the people. Sometimes that is the only thing to be done, and if it is, brace yourself and fight. What you cannot do is just give up or run away in a cowardly fashion. It seems too many white activists do this first and take off without resolving any conflict. This kind of disgusting performance does no one any good. You didn't stand up, and you did not have the courage of your convictions. You left the racist mess intact and played the role that the other whites in control expect out of you. You surrendered to racism. They can smugly know that you can't handle confrontation, and you really do not support POC when it comes down to it. It's just an act or mind game you play with yourself and others. It does not have to be this way at all, of course. In fact, now you have the chance to prove them all wrong. Fight racism and colonialism. Is opportunism really the issue? No condescending saviors. Besides just the current issues around Occupy Wall Street, the white liberal left, or the white radical left itself in this period, is riddled with racism, opportunism, class treachery, and internal oppression, which must be recognized and smashed if it is to be any force for radical change of society. I went back and reviewed the stuff from my earlier work in Anarchism and the Black Revolution, part of which is to critique internal racism and racist exclusion and anarchism specifically, but socialism generally, and it is pretty much the same criticism I am making now against the Occupy tendency. I had done this as part of the research for Political Plantation. Since we know this is a deep-seated problem inside the white radical social justice organizations, this leads us to the unmistakable conclusion that white-led tendencies cannot lead us to revolution, just political reform benefiting themselves as a class primarily. They are the left wing of the white middle class, no matter what rhetoric they use to describe themselves and their goals. The OWS is a perfect example, but before that, the anti-globalization movement and even further back, socialist communist parties have all succumbed to racism and white supremacy. More specifically, it all raises this question. After a new society is created, will it be another unjust white-dominated one, with only political or economic differences from the previous capitalist society, but still maintaining white supremacy? After we have shed blood, sweat, and tears in response to this white-led revolutionary struggle, will black POCs have to fight all over again for their own liberation, because we will have once again been betrayed? We are not fighting to replace one white master for another, nor to be put back into the ghetto. There is no way not to conclude that we need a social revolution with black POC leadership to destroy this system entirely and thoroughly, leaving no traces of racism or capitalism, rather than have the very classes and peoples who have historically oppressed us in charge of our fate. I do not believe or argue that white people are inherently evil, rather that if we do not organize for our own freedom, nobody else will. The only question is how many white people will unite with us in this genuine class unity, mutual aid, and with the same fervor for total change, declaring war on internal racism inside white justice movements. Both anti-racist whites and people of color activists alike must declare war or wage relentless struggle against internal racism and make it clear that it is totally intolerable, an enemy that must be overthrown. Because neither individual anti-racist whites or people of color can effectively wage a struggle against racism inside majority of white organizations, they must build up a powerful internal united front, be it a decolonization society, anti-racist pressure group, semi-autonomous POC network, or other movement. First, they have to educate themselves and others they can get to work with them on the dynamics of internal racism and be actively involved in countering all acts of such racism. This includes the racist denigration of POC and their racist exclusion, but also a situation where the organization is refusing to raise issues affecting communities of color, record unemployment, mass imprisonment, crippling poverty, infant mortality, and other issues which affect those communities much more thoroughly than whites. The whole question of white privilege must be raised but be demystified as a class issue, not merely xenophobia by individual whites, and the anti-racist and all in solidarity with them must struggle against it and take no prisoners. There should be constant political education internally about the oppression of workers of color and that they are a social vanguard to radical change in North America. Revolutionary anti-racists are abolitionists. They wish to abolish internal racism inside their own movements, but also national oppression in the white society. They must take a hard line, not excuse or protect it by flowery language, leniency, cronyism, or the rationale that it must be ended in society before it can be stopped in white radical social movements themselves. Anyone engaged in racist behavior must be summarily dismissed from the group, and further, the central demands of the entire movement have to be constructed around the issues of structural racism, white supremacy, and class super-exploitation of peoples of color. Racism can make a fool or coward of those afraid to fight and destroy it. It can literally destroy a movement on its own, and radical history is full of the death of many of such past coalitions. Institutional racism inside a revolutionary tendency can lead to total discredit of that movement. Even with its lofty goals of solidarity or class unity, it can create enemies against it in the ranks of peoples of color and other segments of the working class. It is not too strong to say that most white radical organizations simply don't want to give up their racist domination of the social change movement. They want to continue to mislead white workers and betray workers of color, as they have always done. In order to make an authentic revolutionary movement, they must be overthrown and defeated. We must kill these bogus movements off before they do irreparable harm and destroy all the radical social movements in North America, especially those liberation movements led by people of color. Conclusion: the struggles of people of color and their hostile relationship with the state is the revolution, not white radicalism. Most white radicals believe that it is their struggles and the resistance of white workers for better wages and against capitalism which is really the force for revolution. This, however, is false consciousness. They may be exploited workers, but they are not oppressed as a people and kept as a captive internal colony of the white government. Their struggles have been primarily around industrial trade unions as a force for radical change, or so they believe, and now it seems to be around a number of cultural and economic movements that primarily affect white middle class workers. The truth is, the white working class fights for accumulation of resources and wages at the expense of workers of color. They have stood behind almost every discriminatory and oppressive policy of the labor movement and the government. It is only because of the civil rights movement of the 1960s that this began to change. Even so, they never supported black radical labor unions in the automobile plants in Detroit and other cities during the 60s and early 70s, and gave very little support to Chicano Mexicano field workers in the agribusiness industry in the Southwest. It was those autonomous black-led unions that actually represented the black workers and all workers in those plants, where the UAW conspired with the auto companies to protect a white job trust that engaged in racial discrimination, while zeroing in on black workers and all workers in those plants, where the UAW in racial discrimination, while zeroing in on black workers for the worst forms of repression and harassment. The white left built no strong support movement for them and stood by and passively watched them get destroyed, just as they had done with the Black Panther Party when it was being smashed by COINTELPRO. Since slavery, it has been the black and POC workers whose forced and exploited labor have built the United States, not white workers, with very few exceptions. They have certainly caught the most hell, which continues to this day. They have depression levels of unemployment and poverty 2 to 3 times that of whites. They are suffering more from being driven to crimes of survival due to the economy, and thus more imprisonment, up to 10 times more than that of white people. In fact, every leading economic and social indicator shows that it is black, native, and Hispanic workers suffering more than any other workers in this society, not white people. This goes all the way back to racial slavery, land theft, colonialism, and genocide of the natives. So, that historical and political contradiction between North American blacks, POC, indigenous, is what's propelling us, the conflict between them and the government today. They are forced to fight just to survive, and they live under the most dismal circumstances, whether in inner city ghetto, a barrio, or reservation. They are an internal colony of the white government. Because white people do not have such a contradiction, theirs is a purely class contradiction. They are not a vanguard revolutionary force, and are incapable of on their own to lead a revolution to free everyone. In fact, if we look at the internal contradictions of a movement like Occupy Wall Street, we see that they can only put forward a middle-class pacifist line, which does not unite with POC liberation struggles. Once again, the oppressed peoples of color under this system will rise up and radicalize the entire society around their demands, and the oppression of their peoples fight for our liberation. The only issue is if white radicals will be our allies or enemies. And that is the end. I think that this might have been like an advanced copy, because I think I saw that there's a longer version by like 10 pages somewhere. So I don't know if that has an intro or if there's editing that went into it that I don't have. But that is my best attempt at the progressive plantation. Just my personal thoughts. A lot of what I found in here is in line with what I learned while I was doing what I could during the 2020 uprising. And since that was through the framework of Black Lives Matter and Black-led movement against police brutality, a lot of these core concepts were taught to me, such as that in any effective revolutionary group, the leadership can't be white cis men. Um, it uh, perhaps it probably really shouldn't even be white people, as we just read through. Um, Although, out in the sticks, sometimes the only poor people uh, to help the poor people are white. Um, but it's never a local movement, it's a movement together. And so, in order for us to have collective liberation, we do need to work together, and we need to learn, white people like me, how to hear things that make us feel uncomfortable and not shut down and pack our shit up and leave, because that happens so much. And we act like toddlers, like we're taking our Tonka truck and going home. And no, when you come to be part of something and put your ass on the line with other people, um, you don't just